All right then, so we'll get started. So thank you for everyone joining our second Hacktoberfest 2022 event with Lisa Tagliaferri. She is the head of developer education at ChainGuard and also on the advisor council for Hacktoberfest this year. And so for our event, it's Introduction to Hacktoberfest 2022 and open source contributions, and also discussing the Cloud Haiku project. Let's just read Lisa's bio. She's, as I mentioned, head of developer education at ChainGuard. She works at the intersection of teaching, research, and development. And Lisa's committed to lowering barriers of entry into technology and open source. Lisa's written popular open access books and tutorials on Python, machine learning, and other technical topics, and is a maintainer builder of open source software. And now I'm going to hand over the baton to Lisa. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate very much being here. I love this community and I love the Python community and I love talking about open source software. So it's a really exciting Tuesday for me. I wanted to start by giving just a little bit of context of where I'm coming from. So I'm Lisa Tagliaferri. I've been working in community and developer education and startups for a number of years now. Today, I'm a head of developer education at ChainGuard, and ChainGuard is a company that is devoted to making the software supply chain secure by default. So it's been exciting to think about open source software and security and how to make sure that all of our communities are protected. So my team and I are currently building a learning platform, the one on the top left, ChainGuard Academy, and it is also open source, and we're trying to help get the word out about how to make security part of the development workflow and not something that is tacked on at the end. These two Python books are ones that I've worked on, and they're totally free and open access. If you're still new to Python, or if you're interested in machine learning. And previously, I was an academic, so I've been in the higher education space for a while. I was working at Harvard and MIT doing digital humanities research. So if anybody's interested in kind of interdisciplinary work, I'm happy to chat about that too. Cool. So open source software, just to give a little bit of an overview for people who may not be as familiar with it, open source has been rising for a number of years. There's more and more and more open source repositories. This chart is from 2008 through 2013. It's not the only GitHub is not the only place to find open source software, but it is one of the biggest places to find open source software. And GitHub, if you're not familiar with it, is a platform where you could host your code. I just wanted to kind of give this definition of open source software. So this is by Lynn Muldrow. And open source software is software that's freely available to use, redistribute, and modify, typically shared via public code repository hosting service, so that you could think about GitHub there, GitLab and Bitbucket are other ones. Projects that are open source encourage a transparent process that is advanced through distributed peer review. Open source projects can be updated quickly and as needed, and offer reliable and flexible software that is not built on locked proprietary systems. So there are a few open source licenses that have different kind of legal implications, and you could read more about those at the Open Source Initiative, which you could find on opensource.org. What's kind of important here is that open source can move quickly, it's community centered, and it's kind of the foundation of a lot of other software that we build today. So if you're thinking about Python packages, like those are open source, and you could leverage those to build, so that you're not starting from scratch, right? You're starting on top of what other people have developed already. Open source is really important because it is what kind of underlies a lot of our software today. So open source software is part of the tools that are used within productivity apps, entertainment apps like Netflix, social media apps like TikTok, and it's also in your cars. It's also you can find it on the Mars rover and other NASA projects as well. Like this, basically, if we didn't have all this open source that community driven efforts created, then we would not be so far along with our innovation and software development today. So in 2013, there were 10 million repos, but now, as of June 2022, GitHub reports having over 83 million users and more than 200 million repositories. So if you think back to that graph that I showed, it's like just keeps going way, way up, and it becomes like even hard to read, like from where we were in the beginning, where it was kind of more flat, but now it's just been like almost like a vertical line up. At least 28 million of these 200 million repositories are public repositories. So GitHub is a place where, community of software developers can be, but it's also a lot of people use GitHub for work. And so some of those will be like closed off. If you wanted to make like a personal website and keep the code closed source as well, you could have a private repo on GitHub. So those are some of those other repositories, but the 28 million at least are public repositories. Cool. So one of the projects that I'm going to talk about today is the Cloud Haiku project. And at the end of October last year, because we're kind of in the middle of it now, there were 435 commits, 270 files changed, and 2,359 additions. So we had a 273 merge pull requests in the last week of October, or the last month of last year's Hacktoberfest. There were still a few open pull requests as of October 27th, and it kind of gives you an idea of the growth of this repo. So we're going to kind of step through this Cloud Haiku so that you all can make a pull request too. So the Cloud Haiku project was a project that I started at DigitalOcean, and DigitalOcean is the leader of Hacktoberfest, and I think we're in the 9th year of Hacktoberfest. It's been a very popular celebration of open source in the month of October for a long time now. And Cloud Haiku was a way of trying to encourage more people to kind of get their feet wet to open up pull request. And this is what the Cloud Haiku looks like on the front end. So it's a website, and any haiku that you contribute will be live on this website, right? So if you haven't done it already, if you could go ahead and create a GitHub account, and if you have one already, then great, and I'll assume that most of you do. But to go create a GitHub account, you would go to github.com and log in. If you happen to be to have a .edu address, you may have some extra privileges with GitHub, because there's a GitHub education pack, which I recommend to students. It gives you a lot of credits with cloud hosts, for example. Like I know DigitalOcean provides some credits so that you could set up a VM. And if you're a teacher, there's a teacher pack that you could get. So I would recommend going through the education workflow if you can. Yeah, the link to so github.com. And yeah, that's the education link. And then the next thing that we should have set up is GitHub Desktop. So GitHub Desktop is a graphical user interface to work with Git. If you have worked with Git on the command line, or you prefer the command line, then by all means, go through that workflow. I use both. I think that the desktop is a little easier to use. So once you go to the desktop website, you'll be able to download it for your own operating system. Cool. So the next step that we will do is to navigate to the repository that you want to contribute to. So in this case, it's going to be Cloud Haiku repository. And I'm going to walk you through all of this in a minute. And then, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and rejoin. Okay. So, okay, so we're going to go through the GitHub workflow. So what I would like you to do is to go to the Cloud Haiku project. And so this is what the project looks like today. One thing to note is that projects have to opt in to Hacktoberfest. So there's this Hacktoberfest tag that we have on this project so that basically we're other projects that don't want to participate in Hacktoberfest are not participating. And as I mentioned, there's the website. This is the front end. It's a Jekyll website, if you're familiar with it, which is built on Ruby. But the important thing is that it basically just serves markdown files, and markdown files are just a way of it's similar to HTML, where it has a way to kind of format your text. So the haikus, yes, and sign up for Hacktoberfest so your contribution counts. The haikus are all in this directory, this underscore haikus, and I'll show you what those look like as long as my computer cooperates. So these are all the haikus, and they're all in alphabetical order, right? So if you look at them, this is what they look like. We'll show you the raw. So this is the format that we're going to need to take for our pull request. So we're going to create a new file. It's going to look something like this. This is the kind of header information that Jekyll uses to start formatting the page. And then this is the haiku itself. Yes, the haiku definition is 3 syllable or 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. It's a form of Japanese poetry. Most of the haikus in this repo are in English, but feel free to use whatever human language you would like. And then the next thing, so those are what the haikus look like. So we're going to contribute a haiku, and what we're going to do is open a pull request. There's a lot of pull requests this year. So what the pull requests look like once you contribute it, this is the person, the username who's creating the pull request. They can write a message, and then there's the files that are being changed. So this is the new addition, and we see that it's in the haikus directory. It's this markdown file, and this is what they want to have merged. So a pull request is basically somebody in the community, or it could be somebody you work with, right? Somebody who you're collaborating with, who is requesting that the maintainer of the repository pull in their contribution, right? So with sometimes it might be a new file, sometimes it might be an edit on an existing file. So in the case of, like, if we're building software and we want to do a new feature, we might be adding several new files to make that feature. If we notice some issues with the documentation, then we might go look at the README and say, oh, there's things that need to be updated here. So let's make sure, let's just kind of edit this existing file. Cool. So I'm going to take you through the process. So with GitHub Desktop, this is what GitHub Desktop looks like. So what you need to do first, if you haven't done so, is to clone the repo. So if you're using the GitHub Desktop workflow, what you would do is you would navigate here. The next thing would be to create a fork of the repo. I already have a fork, and my fork looks like this with a different username. Right, so I would want to sync this fork because mine's a little out of date. And then what I would do is I would open this with GitHub Desktop. And when you do that, it will ask if that's okay. And here we go. And I'm actually going to go to the main one because I'm maintaining it. So this is what the repo looks like today. And if you're just cloning it for the first time, you shouldn't have these, that to fetch from the origin again. But basically what you would do is from your fork, you would copy this if you want to do it on the Git on the terminal, and I'll give you the code. So you would do git clone, and then it would be your username. Okay, so it would be like this, and then we could go through that terminal process too. So basically, we want to make sure that everything is looking good, and then what you could do is open up something like VS Code if you like, or however you like to edit code anyway. And we're going to create a new file. So here is the haikus. We'll create a new file, and it just needs, and I'm going to start it with 0 so that we can find it. So here is the haiku file. It's just a new file in the _haikus directory. And what I'm going to do is, just to make things easy, I'm just going to copy somebody else's header so that we could work off of there without pasting it, or without creating it from scratch. So the header in this Jekyll markdown needs to have these three lines, 3 hyphens. The layout needs to be the haiku layout. The title is what the title of our poem is. And then the author, it could be your name. It could be just your first name. It could be like your GitHub username if you want. And then from here is where you will create the haiku. So I could copy and paste this into the chat for you all, if that makes it easier. So those will be the first. Okay, so to create the file. So however you usually create a new file. So in VS Code, you could click this plus file icon, and that will create a new file for you. You could also do new file from the file menu. If you're using like PyCharm or something else, I think it's similar. If you're just working in your directory itself, you could just like touch a new file in your terminal. And then what we are going to do is write the haiku itself. Let's see. Women who code. Let's see. Women who code.
Rocks.
Who code what? Who code
Women who-
rocks? Okay.
I think that's 5. Let me just
Yeah.
like counting.
Yeah. Okay. So something like this. I like to do the breaks in HTML to make sure nothing goes wrong, but if you have a space after it, it'll be fine. And then I like to have an extra line at the end. So something like this. We do ask for original haikus, but if you just want to test, then you could copy paste it or modify it a little bit. Just make sure you use your own name. Use a file name that's different from other file names there. I think, if you add these, it's getting a little unwieldy over here, but as long as it's like an original haiku or like related to your name or related to the year, I think it'll be fine. And this is what the haiku itself looks like. Yeah, 575. So women who code rocks. Python is our favorite. Women code Python. No, women code Python. Okay, so that's 575. Okay, so if you're using the command prompt, what you would do is I'm sorry, this whole thing is just a mess. So I would go to Cloud Haiku. Okay, so if you're in here, then I would navigate into CD haikus, and then you would be able to see all the haikus in there if you want, and then you would touch to create a new file, or you could use like V or Nano to create a new file, and then the way you would do that would be Nano, if you want to do 000 haiku.md, and then I will just copy paste this and then just save it. And then there will be a new file there, and we'll see it reflected over here too. Cool. And then, so for the GitHub Desktop workflow, so I created 2 files, so let me just delete the new one. And with the with the GitHub Desktop file system, right, so we see this new haiku that was added. So one thing was changed. We know right away that it was changed. I'm going to create a new branch. If you're using your fork, you could keep it on the main branch. Branches are basically a way to keep things discrete, and it helps a lot if you're creating like more than one feature at the same time, or if you need to, your collaborators will be working on different branches and you could pull down their branches. I think Git could be like a pretty complicated versioning tool. So just to keep it simple, we could create like this Hacktoberfest Women Who Code branch. And we're going to bring our changes with us. So this will keep it very discrete. It's on our own branch. It's on our own fork. And then the next thing we're going to do is to commit this change. So a commit is basically a snapshot of every change that you make to a Git repo. So if I add this poem, I will commit it, and that will be one commit. If I am like, oh, I need to edit something that I made in the past, and then I make an edit and save the file, and then I'll commit it to the same branch, that'll be like a second commit. So for here, we could keep it just what GitHub Desktop gives us, and then we would do commit to Hacktoberfest, and then what we would do is we would publish the branch, okay? And then from the GitHub Desktop, we could create the pull request right here. So here it says create 000 haiku. I'm adding a new haiku. And then we would create the pull request. And then you will see that this is open. It's an open pull request. Everything looks right. It looks the same as our machine. So this is a way that we could collaborate with others. They could take, our documentation, they could take our code, they could take whatever it is that we're adding to this repo, and they could merge it in, and then they could continue building off of it. And then the maintainer, would kind of look through, they would see and make sure that everything looks okay. They would review changes. They could approve the pull request, or they could request changes. I'm going to remove the pull request because I don't need to do more pull requests. Cool. And then I will also show you how to do it for the terminal really quick. So with Git, so it says I'm on the branch Hacktoberfest WWC, which is fine. I'm going to create a new branch so that we keep everything separate. Oh, I can't pull this down. So Git checkout -B, it's -B, it's like a flag. And then Women Who Code Hacktoberfest, will do it this way. And then, so we could do git status and make sure everything is clean. So then we would do this nano, and then we would write our haiku, save it, and then we would do git status now. And we see that there's one file that's not being tracked. So we would add it by doing git add 000 haiku.md. And then if we see git status again, then we see that that new file is actually being tracked. And then we do git commit -m with the with like a message. So this is a git commit message, adding. Okay, and then we would do git push, and then I always just copy this. Okay, and then we will see, and then the pull request we could finish over here with the create pull request. Although I changed 2 files, but I think I pulled things over. Yeah, so I will, yeah, this is great. So git checkout -b and your new branch name. Git status lets you check your commits. Git add and then the file that you changed, and then git push, and that will send it to your fork. And if it gives you this like set the remote, then you could just do this. Okay. Cool. And then, so yeah, so then the next part is just going through the workflow. So one of the maintainers will review your pull request, and if everything looks good, they'll merge it in. If anything looks like they need changes, then they'll request changes, and you could go through that process. So if you're working with like Python and you're contributing Python code, then maybe there might be like a coding style that repo is using. So they might give you like feedback on that, or they might suggest doing things a different way for achieving that, the feature that you're building on or the change you're making. Are there any questions right now about this? Cool. And I do have a lot of resources on this. I know if you're coming to this at the, yeah, how do you check your haiku? In terms of like linting it, I think, let's see, there might be haiku checkers. Is this a haiku? Yeah, so you could check it here, which is great. And then when you yeah, nice, thank you. So you could check it there. We did used to have CI/CD to like check it, and it got broken terribly. So we need to fix that. But ideally, like the repo itself would check it. There is a question about how is GitHub useful for beginners, and GitHub is where there are a lot of developers, and I think being involved in open source is really useful for kind of building the software that's important to you and your community, but it could also be really important for kind of building your career, because open source contributions are one of the ways that you could showcase the work that you do. And if you're working with a community, then it helps you like in terms of networking, because then you'll know more people will be familiar with your work. And GitHub is, I mean, I created like a really simple website over the weekend. And I reached for using everything with Git anyway, because it keeps everything version controlled. So it's a way that you could roll back changes if something doesn't work. Even though it's something that I was working on by myself, it's still a really valuable tool. If you're working with others, then it's really, really valuable, because that's how you could keep everything discrete and everything separate. Cool. So I'm just going to share a few ideas about how to get involved with open source. And one of the projects that I have been very involved with is a project called Sigstore. Sigstore is a suite of security tools that help you secure your software, and it helps make open source software more secure generally. And it's very developer intuitive to use. It doesn't require the use of like GPG keys. It In fact, they recommend using totally keyless signing, which means that you don't have to save any files on your computer. And it also lets you do, it also helps you with signing commits so that we know who is committing to an open source project. And the way that we sign commits, and I'm not going to actually run it because I already made the commit, but it would be git commit -m or -s for sign, -m, and then you would write your commit message. And this is the git sign tool. It's very simple to use. And here, yeah, so Sigstore, what's cool about Sigstore this year is that we're opting a few of the repos into Hacktoberfest. So one of the repos is the docs site, and the docs site is available here. So if you're interested in kind of getting your feet wet with like an open source documentation tool, we could do it right. You're welcome to kind of look through the issues we have, and I'm going to add more issues. So if you are looking for like a community to get involved with, I highly recommend Sigstore. We have a lot of people across different companies working on it, from Google, Red Hat, ChainGuard, and a lot of other companies. And we have weekly meetings. The other project that is accepting Hacktoberfest contributions is the Cosign project. And this is good advice for basically anything, but one way of thinking about how to contribute is to look for this good first issue tag. So we see that there's 14 issues that are open in the Cosign repo. So if you wanted to do a coding contribution instead of like a docs contribution, then this is a way you could start looking for them, to go to an open source project, to go to their issues, and then to look for this good first issue label, which is good for newcomers. And what's nice is that for places that are tagging their issues like this, then they're already thinking about how are they going to help onboard somebody to a new project. And this is a way to find like mentors in this space. Cosign itself is mostly written in Go, but if you're basically, that same kind of workflow is how I would recommend getting involved in open source. So go to a project that you use, right? So if you use Django a lot, go to the Django project. If you do data science, go to a data science library that you use a lot, and then go and look at their repo, look at their issues, and then look for their good first issues label. And what you could do first, right, is just go and read the issue, and then you could start commenting on the issue, right, to try to get more feedback and see like if you could be assigned it, and then that will make you, that will start to help you get involved in that community. So these are the two repos that I just shared, and I can share them in the chat, and we'll also have access to this file. I'll share that in the chat. So the other thing about Hacktoberfest this year, and I'll open Hacktoberfest, is that they're interested in, where is it? They're interested in non-code or low-code contributions this year. I can't find the guidance about it. Okay, yeah, so this is it, low or no code contribution. So they're interested in helping people who are maybe not ready to contribute code to an open source project. So doing technical documentation, doing translation. So on the Cloud Haiku project, a number of people have translated the README file. It might be design, like sometimes open source projects want a new logo, or they don't have a logo at all, and they might have an issue open for a logo, and that's great, and a great open source contribution. There's also the advocacy piece, so thinking about like social media and blog posts, talks, presentations, and things like that. The way that you kind of contribute something like that to a repo, you are going to have to talk to the maintainers about it. But say you want to give a workshop about matplotlib or something, and then you create a slide deck, then maybe they would put that inside their repo. So basically, like all of these things, like planning events, designing, writing, those are all meaningful open source contributions. It's not exclusive to code. And there's this open source design .net that has information about that. And there's the first timers only, up for grabs and awesome for beginners repos that could help you do a pull request too, like the Cloud Haiku project. And Hacktoberfest registration is now open. So if you want to participate in Hacktoberfest, you should go through this start hacking and authenticate with GitHub if that's what you're using, or you could do with GitLab. Right. So if we want to make a fork of cosine, for example, you would do the fork and you'd create a new fork, and it would be your username, the repository name, and then you would create the fork. And then what you would do is you would open it with GitHub Desktop, and then it would be set to your fork, because that would be the one that you would have the commit access to. And if you have direct access, like if you're working on a project with collaborators, like if it's a school project or if it's like a work project or something like this, then you should have commit access, and everybody likes to do things differently, whether it's forks and branches or whether it's just branches, but whatever it is that they recommend, the project recommends, is what I would do. And then that would be how you would contribute. So for low code and no code contributions, a lot of those are going to be like documentation contributions, I think would be the most common. And let's see, I think Airbytes docs are open source, like as an example. And you could go to edit this page, right? So this is the Airbyte public docs, and this would be like, this is an example of like, if you've used Airbyte before, you may want to contribute to the docs, and they have a contributing guidelines. I understand that this guideline is really good. So they have the guidelines for contributing, and then you could go through that process. But I would say that what you should be doing to look for open source contributions, so those ones that I mentioned, right, are some of the ones for if you just want to start getting involved and start testing, right? These are the first timers only, one up for grabs, etc. But I would say that the best way to do this is to think about the projects that you are using every day. So the libraries that you use in Python, or whatever programming language you use. So if you're like a web developer, maybe you're using Flask or Django. If you're using Python, maybe you're using a JavaScript framework. I would just think about what it is that you're using. I would think about what problems you have with that project already. Like, are there things that you think could be better? And then that's where I would go to the open source repo. I would find the repo, and then the first thing I would do if it's an issue that doesn't exist is I would file the issue, right? So that we could start the comment process. So I would file the issue, then some of the maintainers could start talking to you about it. Some other people in the community can start talking to you about it. And then maybe that's the issue for you. Otherwise, if you like love a certain tool, then you would go to and you want to give back to the community, then I would go to that project page, then I would go to the issues, and then I would look for this good first issue tag, and then take it from here. So see if there are ones that you could do.
And another question someone else asking where they can find new Python beginner projects is also, we just updated our Women Who Code GitHub Hacktoberfest website. So still kind of updating, but it's like womanucode.com/Hacktoberfest. And you click on the link there, it'll take us to our 2022 GitHub website. And if you go to the tabs, we're covering all the tracks, data science, blockchain, cloud. You click on Python, and we have a list of like beginner friendly repos. It's still being updated though, so yeah, just keep an eye on it. And we also have, I think, the Hacktoberfest channel in our Woman Who Code Python Slack. I guess another question I had for you, Lisa. Do you have like a fun or favorite like open source project you're working on outside of work, or is work like your fun project?
No, it is Cloud Haiku is my fun project. I mean, I do a lot of the open source I do is related to teaching, and I made a slide deck about Git for humanists. So for people who are not, so my academic work is in the humanities, so I do a lot of coding with the humanities. This is a slide deck that talks about the different forks and things like that. So how do you contribute to it, or how do you think about forks? How do you think about branches, and how do you think about pull requests and fetching and all that language? So yeah, there's a lot of cool open source projects, I think. I really like the Sixer community, and we are accepting documentation. The Cloud Haiku one is my project that I started, and I am maintaining it now. And yeah, I just would love to have more people get involved with open source, because this is what underlies all of software. And if we're not the ones who are building the software, then somebody else is. And how can we make sure that we're serving our communities and the people that we care about?
Right, because I'll share my video a little bit. Because what I think I was following a Twitter conversation lately, when they're saying like programming language used to be like solving problems or like think of interesting new things to do versus like software eating the world. So yeah, I think that's like great, just having like open source. Like yeah, like it's like the Wild West. Well, kind of, but like more freedom to do interesting new ideas. I guess the last follow-up question, is there any projects you'd like to see more of? Like, I know you're doing like with literature, humanities, like, did you want to see more underwater stuff, stuff in space, stuff with weather? I don't know. Like
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because I think that people who are developers are the ones who are thinking about that. But what if biologists are thinking about this, right? And by a biologist that creates like a new open source tool and then encourages other biologists and other developers to join in on that, like that's great. That's exactly the right direction, I think. Like all that kind of, how do we solve the problems that exist today in biology that can be solved with software? Like not everything can be solved with software, but
But if you can automate or like solve some bit, because like I think I saw someone who was like a programmer and they decided to become a farmer, the dream. Anyways, but they're like looking at like the tractor software, just like stuff used in agriculture, and like the code is like really old but still working. But because it works so well, it's just like it could be better, but just like because it works so well, it's like you don't touch it, don't break it. But yeah, I agree. Just saying with like biologists, healthcare, like automating, making like saving time and like able like to solve the problems, but still keeping like that human aspect, like you said, in the equation. Seeing some people post in the chat saying they learned a lot. It's a great presentation. They look up open source projects. Any other final advice want to give like when you were starting out in open source?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be intimidating. And that's why I wanted to create like the Cloud Haiku project, so that I know that there are going to be like maintainers on the other end that will help you. So I think that a nice way to kind of start to see if a project is a good project is to see if they have a code of conduct, to see if they have those contributor onboarding guides, like the Airbyte example has a contributor guide. So I would look for those as like good signals and see if they have like a Slack or a Discord, and if you could interact with people directly. Like there's so many nice people in open source, and yeah, I think a lot of people want to help and mentor people getting involved.
Yeah, everyone was a beginner once, and like from what I see in like when the conference speakers or just like meetups, events, or even like these like panels, like everyone's like so warm friendly. They were a beginner once too, and like we're helping them stand on the shoulder of giants, right?
Yeah.
People do what they can, and it's getting better. And I've seen more companies saying like, yeah, we use open source and like we're giving back to the community. So and like we have Hacktoberfest every year, right? Like bring attention more people who might not know about these projects. So yeah. Everyone just post a thank you or a thank you emoji to Lisa in the chat. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today and like sharing how to Q project and what you're working on, what you're excited about. And I just really love during your presentation, like give the sunlight in your face, so you're like glowing, like basking in the radiance. And yeah, just keep up the conversation going in our Hacktoberfest Slack channel. Sorry, it's like a lot of words in our Women Who Code Python community. Slack community, the Hacktoberfest channel. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you so much, Lisa. And everyone have a happy, spooky Halloween October season.
Yeah,
All
happy
right.
Hacktoberfest.
Happy Oktoberfest. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.